Welcome back to F1 Burnouts. I'm your host, and today we're diving into something that's gonna blow your engineering-loving minds. We're talking about the 2026 power unit regulations. And trust me, the drama behind these engines is almost as good as the racing. We've got loopholes, we've got betrayals, we've got a company that literally gutted their entire F1 program and is now scrambling to build an engine in less than a year. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So let's start with the basics, because the 2026 engines, they're fundamentally different from what we've seen before. The headline change, and this is massive, is the removal of the MGU-H. Now, for those of you who don't spend your weekends reading technical regulations like I apparently do, the MGU-H was this incredibly complex heat energy recovery system connected to the turbocharger. Brilliant piece of engineering that literally no road car manufacturer wanted to touch with a 10-foot pole. And here's the thing, the MGU-H was so road irrelevant that Audi and Porsche, both from the Volkswagen Group, essentially told the FIA, yeah, we're not coming unless you get rid of that thing. That's right, two of the world's biggest automotive manufacturers held F1 hostage over a piece of plumbing. And you know what? It worked. The FIA caved, the MGU-H is gone, and suddenly these engines are simpler to develop. Well, simpler is relative in Formula One, but you get the point.
What we have now is a 50-50 power split between the internal combustion engine and the electrical system. 50-50! That's up from the roughly 80-20 split we had before. The MGU-K now produces 350 kilowatts. That's 470 horsepower, coming purely from electrical power. And the energy recovery from braking? Doubled. We're harvesting 8.5 megajoules per lap. This is aggressive hybrid technology that F1 is pushing to the extreme, but it's actually road relevant now. Every major car manufacturer understands this technology because they're putting it in their production cars. Now, speaking of things that are road relevant, sustainable fuels. These 2026 power units run on 100% advanced sustainable fuels. Carbon capture, municipal waste, non-food biomass, we're burning zero new fossil carbon here. And if you want the deep dive on how F1 is literally pulling carbon out of the atmosphere to make race fuel, go check out the first episode of F1 Burnouts. We did a complete breakdown of the fuel revolution. Trust me, it's worth your time. All right, now let's get to the juicy stuff. Because with new regulations come new opportunities. And by opportunities, I mean loopholes that make other manufacturers absolutely furious. Let me tell you about the compression ratio controversy. This one's beautiful. So, the FIA reduced the compression ratio from 18:1 down to 16:1 for 2026. The idea was to make it easier for new manufacturers to compete, level the playing field a bit. Noble intentions, how sweet. But here's the thing. Mercedes and Red Bull powertrains found something interesting in the wording of the regulations. Article C5.4.3 states that compression ratio measurements must be executed at ambient temperature. At ambient temperature, not at operating temperature. And here's where physics gets delicious. Metal expands when heated. An F1 engine's combustion chamber can exceed 700 degrees Celsius during operation. So Mercedes and Red Bull designed their engines to measure exactly 16:1 when cold. But when they're running hot, thermal expansion pushes that effective compression ratio closer to 18:1. The performance gain? We're talking about 10 kilowatts, 13 horsepower, and a lap time advantage of 3 to 4 tenths of a second depending on the track. At Spa or Monza with all those long straights, that's absolutely massive. Ferrari, Audi, and Honda are reportedly furious and have demanded FIA intervention. But the FIA's response? The rules clearly define measurements at ambient temperature. This procedure has remained unchanged. Translation: it's legal. Deal with it. Ben Hodgkinson, Red Bull Powertrain's technical director, called it, and I quote, a lot of noise about nothing, and said he's confident what we're doing is legal. Now here's an interesting tidbit about Ben Hodgkinson. He spent 20 years at Mercedes high-performance powertrains before jumping ship to Red Bull. Maybe he brought some ideas with him? Now, speaking of Mercedes, they have something that no other power unit manufacturer has in 2026. 4 teams running their engine. 4. Mercedes Works Team, McLaren, Williams, and now Alpine after the Renault shutdown. That's 8 cars on the grid generating data for Brixworth. Ferrari has 3 teams. Red Bull has 2. Honda has 1. Audi has 1. Mercedes, 4. The data advantage is enormous. And here's what makes it even more interesting. McLaren beat Mercedes to the Constructors' Championship in 2024 and 2025 using a Mercedes engine. Think about that for a moment. A customer team running the exact same power unit outperformed the factory team. Now, some people might see that as embarrassing for Mercedes. I see it as validation. Because what McLaren's success proves is that the Mercedes power unit isn't the problem. It's competitive, it's reliable, it can win championships. The issue for Mercedes has been the whole package: aerodynamics, chassis, setup, strategy. And that's actually useful information. When your customer team wins with your engine, you know exactly where to focus your development resources. You're not chasing power unit ghosts. The data from 4 different teams, 4 different chassis philosophies, 4 different approaches, it all flows back to Brixworth and helps them understand their power unit better than anyone else on the grid. Now, before anyone gets too excited about Mercedes walking away with 2026 like they did in 2014, pump the brakes. The regulations are completely different now. We have cost caps, we have tighter technical restrictions, we have more parity-focused rules. The days of one manufacturer spending their way to a 2-second advantage are over. Mercedes absolutely has structural advantages: the customer team data, the compression ratio loophole, the institutional knowledge. But a 2014-style domination? The regulations simply won't allow it. And frankly, that's good for the sport. Now let's talk about Ferrari, because they've taken a completely different approach to innovation. Instead of playing games with compression ratios, Ferrari focused on something fundamental: weight. The new regulations require significant weight reduction across the power unit, and Ferrari went all in on material science. They developed their power unit using steel alloys that are actually lighter than the traditional aluminum components. I'll say that again because it sounds counterintuitive. Steel, lighter than aluminum. The weight advantage is significant, and it doesn't just benefit Ferrari. It flows down to their customer teams, Haas and now Cadillac for 2026. Better weight distribution, lower center of gravity, improved handling characteristics. It's the kind of innovation that doesn't grab headlines like a loophole controversy, but it's proper engineering excellence. Though, speaking of Ferrari's engineering department, they might have some problems. Here's a story that hasn't gotten enough attention. When Renault announced they were shutting down Alpine's F1 engine program, and believe me, we'll get to that disaster in a moment, Ferrari swooped in and hired several of their engineers. Smart move, right? Bring in fresh talent from a competitor. Except, those engineers started talking, and what they're saying isn't exactly flattering. According to reports, the former Renault engineers have been, quote, not impressed by Ferrari's 2026 power unit development. Some have apparently rejected Ferrari's current approach entirely. And here's the kicker. They claim that Alpine's canceled 2026 engine, which never even got finished, was further ahead than what Ferrari currently has. Let that sink in. A canceled project from a team that's now a customer team was better than Ferrari's current work. Italian engineering Twitter is having a meltdown right now. Now, about Alpine and that catastrophic decision. Look, Renault's F1 engine program had been struggling for the better part of a decade. The hybrid era was not kind to them. But here's what makes it tragic. They had an engine freeze in place, which meant they couldn't even develop improvements during the current regulations, so they were stuck with an underperforming unit, watching everyone else pull ahead. When Renault announced they were pulling the plug on the very Châtillon engine factory in September 2024, ending 50 years of French F1 engine development, the employees staged protests at the Italian Grand Prix, signs saying, "Save 50 years of French Formula One." And their work on the 2026 engine? It was apparently exceeding internal targets. They were doing better than expected, and they still got shut down. Now Alpine is a Mercedes customer team. The irony is palpable. All right, let's shift gears to Honda, because their story is complicated. When Red Bull and Honda split at the end of 2021, Red Bull started their own powertrains division. They didn't just take over the Honda engines, they started hiring. Ben Hodgkinson came over from Mercedes as technical director. Other key personnel from Honda who wanted to stay in F1 joined Red Bull powertrains rather than return to Japan. The people who actually built those championship-winning engines, many of them stayed with Red Bull. The remaining team members at Honda, they were diverted to electrification projects within the company. That was the whole point of Honda quitting F1, to reallocate resources to sustainability initiatives, which is noble, I suppose, if you ignore the fact that they completely gutted one of the most successful F1 programs in recent history. The Sakura facility went down to a skeleton crew, from championship-winning operation to basically a caretaker mode. And then Honda decided to come back. May 2023, they announced a works partnership with Aston Martin starting in 2026. Beautiful, right? Except they now had to rebuild almost from scratch, go on a hiring spree, restructure the entire operation, and build a completely new power unit for the most significant regulation change in a decade, all in less than a year. What could possibly go wrong? Well, according to Honda Racing Corporation President Koji Watanabe in January 2025, the development has been not so easy, and quote, "We are struggling." He said, "To be honest, not everything is going well, so there are many areas where we are struggling. This is the company partnering with Adrian Newey's Aston Martin. This is supposed to be the dream team, and they're admitting they're on the back foot."
Which brings us to an absolutely fascinating leadership restructure at Aston Martin. Adrian Newey, yes, that Adrian Newey, the greatest car designer in F1 history, is now the team principal starting in 2026. And Andy Cowell, who was originally brought in as Group CEO, has moved to a new role as Chief Strategy Officer. Now, why would you take one of the greatest automotive engineering minds in Andy Cowell and move him away from running the team? Here's the thing about Andy Cowell that most casual fans might not appreciate. Before joining Aston Martin, he was at the helm of Mercedes' high-performance powertrains. He was the guy responsible for developing the engines that dominated Formula One from 2014 to 2021. 7 consecutive Constructors' Championships. That's not luck, that's Andy Cowell. So when Aston Martin says they're moving Cowell to focus on optimizing technical partnerships between the team, Honda, Aramco, and Valvoline, and ensuring seamless integration of the new power unit, fuel, and chassis, read between the lines. They're putting their engine whisperer on full-time Honda duty because they know the power unit situation needs all hands on deck. Adrian Newey even admitted it. With the challenge of the 2026 power unit, Andy's skill set in helping the three-way relationship made this restructure logical. Now let's talk about someone who left one Italian team and might just be the best thing that ever happened to a German one. Mattia Binotto, former Ferrari team principal, now running Audi's entire F1 project. And yes, before he became team principal, Binotto was Ferrari's engine guy. He understands power units at a fundamental level. Audi has been refreshingly honest about their expectations. Binotto stated clearly, "We know that 2026 will not be the year in which we'll be at the top. We won't have the best power unit. But, and this is important, they have a plan. A 3-phase model. 2026, they're challengers. Phase 2, they become competitors. And by 2030, they're racing for victories and championships."
The infrastructure they've built is genuinely impressive. The Competence Center Motorsport in Neuburg-an-der-Donau has been expanded specifically for Formula One. They've had a complete powertrain, engine, and gearbox running on 22 test benches since last year. The first fire-up and a chassis is coming soon, with engine shipping to Bahrain for February testing. For a brand new manufacturer entering the sport, that's remarkable progress. And having Binotto there? Look, I know Ferrari fans still have feelings about his time as team principal, and some of those feelings are completely valid, but his engineering credentials are unquestionable. For Audi, he's a genuine asset. For Ferrari, well, let's just say watching him potentially lead Audi to championship contention in 2030 might sting a little. All right, final topic, and this one's pure speculation territory, which is my favorite kind of territory. Cadillac, General Motors, an American manufacturer building an F1 power unit. The Cadillac Formula One team enters in 2026, running Ferrari engines, but they've already formed GM Performance Power Units LLC with a $150 million investment in a dedicated facility near Charlotte. Russ O'Blains, who has over 30 years of motorsport experience, is heading up the power unit venture. The target is to have their own engines ready for 2028, which would make Cadillac a full works team, the first American constructor with American engines since... Honestly, I'd have to go back to the early days of the championship to find a proper comparison. Now, here's the monumental challenge they face. They're starting from zero, not skeleton crew zero like Honda, Actual zero. Building a facility, hiring personnel, developing technology, testing, all while the established manufacturers have decades of institutional knowledge. Ferrari has been making F1 engines since the 1950s. Mercedes' Brixworth facility is basically a temple of hybrid power unit development. And Cadillac is going to waltz in and compete?
But here's why I'm cautiously optimistic. General Motors is not a small company. They have resources, they have manufacturing expertise, they have a massive presence in American motorsport, NASCAR, IndyCar, Le Mans. The question isn't whether they can build an engine. The question is whether they can build an F1 engine that's competitive against organizations that have been perfecting this craft for generations.
Think about what the 2028 and 2029 grid could look like. Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, Ford, Honda, Audi, and Cadillac. 6 power unit manufacturers. We haven't seen that kind of manufacturer diversity in F1 for decades. The competition, the innovation, the political drama. I cannot wait. Now, before we wrap up, I have to talk about what just happened in Barcelona. The 5-day shakedown test just concluded. Behind closed doors, no official timing, very hush-hush. But we've managed to piece together some absolutely fascinating data. And let me tell you, the engine stories we've been discussing, they're already playing out on track. Let's start with the headline numbers. Mercedes completed 502 laps over their 3 days. That's 2,325 kilometers. For context, that's nearly a round trip between their UK factory and Barcelona, with a brand new car under completely new regulations. George Russell set the unofficial fastest time on day 4, a 1:16.4, before Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari snatched it on day 5 with a 1:16.3. But here's the thing everyone's talking about. Mercedes ran a full race simulation on only day 2. Most teams wait until the final days of testing for that. They hit the ground sprinting. Ferrari completed 440 laps. Impressive considering they ran on the wet day 2. Hamilton's fastest time at the end of the test showed the SF26 has pace. And here's something the Tifosi will love. The Haas VF26, running the Ferrari power unit, completed the most laps of any team on a single day. Esteban Ocon racked up 154 laps on his full day in the car. That Ferrari engine looking seriously reliable. Now, Red Bull Powertrains. Remember, this is their first ever in-house power unit. Completed 623 laps between the 2 Red Bull power teams. That's Red Bull Racing and RB. Ben Hodgkinson's team delivered. Isaac Hodger even topped the timesheet on day 1. They had a setback when Hodger crashed on day 2 in the wet, badly damaging the rear suspension, but they flew spare parts from Milton Keynes overnight and were back running by day 4. For a power unit built from scratch, that's not just good, that's exceptional. And then there's Aston Martin. Remember everything I said about Honda struggling and Andy Cowell being moved to engine integration duty? Yeah. The AMR 26 finally appeared on day 4, in the final hour. Lance Stroll completed 5 laps. 5 before the car stopped at pit lane entry and caused a red flag. His fastest time was a 1 minute 46 seconds, 30 seconds off the pace. They got more running on day 5, with Alonso doing 61 laps, but Fernando's assessment? We still have lots of problems to solve and a bit of a mountain to climb. Honda confirmed their internal combustion engine development is, quote, not going as planned. I really hope they sort this out, but the signs are concerning. Audi ended the test with 243 laps after a troubled start, technical issues on day 1 and hydraulic problems on day 3, but they recovered brilliantly on day 5, with Hülkenberg and Bortoleto completing 144 laps between them. And Cadillac? 164 laps total. Remember, this team had only 323 days between FIA approval and the first test day. For a brand new operation, getting a car on track for all 3 of their allocated days is a genuine achievement. Pat Simons and Graham Loudon are building something real here.
So what does this all mean? Let me give you my completely speculative, probably wrong, but extremely confident predictions. Mercedes looks like the early favorite. That lap count and their race simulation confidence is ominous. Ferrari has the pace and the reliability. Red Bull Powertrains has proved the doubters wrong, at least so far. McLaren had fuel system issues and only managed 124 laps, which is concerning for the defending champions. And Aston Martin? They're the wild card. If Honda can sort out the IC issues by Bahrain testing, they could surprise everyone. If not, It's going to be a long season. So that's the 2026 engine landscape. Simpler regulations that attracted new manufacturers, a 50-50 power split pushing hybrid technology to extremes, sustainable fuels that could actually change the world, loopholes that have some teams furious, programs being canceled, rebuilt, scrambled together in record time. And now we've seen these engines on track, some flying, some struggling, all of them pushing the boundaries of what's possible. That's all for today's episode of F1 Burnouts. If you learned something new, or if you now have strong opinions about compression ratios and thermal expansion, share this episode with someone who needs more F1 engineering drama in their life. The Bahrain tests start February 11th, so we'll know a lot more soon. I'm your host, and until next time, keep the rubber on the track. And remember, in Formula One, even the rule book has loopholes. Take care.
Engineering that literally no road car manufacturer wanted to touch with a 10-foot pole. And here's the thing. The MGU-H was so road irrelevant that Audi and Porsche, both from the Volkswagen Group, essentially told the FIA, yeah, we're not coming unless you get rid of it.